Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations present in the 21st century digital media landscape, as well as other areas of our life and society that we may be vulnerable to exist in, at least to attack, from manipulations that we might not necessarily see, be aware of, or need to learn a little bit more about in order to keep our minds on guard day to day throughout our lives. Tonight, we're going to pick back up with our discussion on the education system in the United States and its impact on the thinking skills and capacity of the people in this country. It's been a while since we've hit on this topic, and as such, we'll do a small amount of review of some of the topics and names that we've discussed in the past so that we can try to build into a new understanding moving forward. I expect there to be a fair amount of overlap with many of the subjects and topics that we've covered so far, and hopefully that macro level connections between all of the components that make up the state of things in the 21st century, like particularly with respect to thinking and reasoning well about the world, will begin to become more clear. That mosaic that we've been trying to paint here and create here is really, really important, and we will continue to build it as we dive deeper into how we got to where we are today. As we go through this next exploration of the education system, please leave comments below in the comments section if you make any connections to the other subjects that we've discussed so far. The point of this channel and all of this study is to have a conversation about what we experience and reason together about how to do that in better and more efficient ways. Iron sharpens iron here, so please don't be shy. Leave your thoughts, and let's get a conversation going. The last time we looked at the development of the U.S. education system, we were focusing on a man named John Dewey, and he was dubbed the father of American education. He was put in charge of the curriculum development and really overseeing the entire endeavor of the American education system. He was at the forefront of the effort to shift the foundations of the ways that we educate our children. Dewey was a part of a group of men who envisioned a socialist utopian future, and as such, he worked to inject the ideals aimed at achieving those ends into the school system. He would use the public schools as a testing ground for various social and psychological experiments which targeted the emotional and more irrational parts of the young minds that were inside the classrooms. As a proponent and supporter of the experimental psychology that was being developed, or had been developed, rather, in Germany under Wilhelm Wundt, Dewey's experiments and methods were in stark contrast to the traditional forms of education that had been established in America prior to his tenure. In his own words, quote, "Education consists either in the ability to use one's own powers in a social direction or else in ability to share in the experiences of others and thus widen the individual consciousness to that of the race. The ultimate problem of all education is to coordinate the psychological and social factors. The coordination itself demands that the child be capable of expressing himself, but in such a way as to realize social ends." Now, this is a radical departure from the classical style of education which had been established in America prior to the early 20th century. What was once a methodology of teaching in order to gain the tools for thinking and reasoning well about the world from an empirical, truth-centered trajectory became a breeding ground for the kinds of thinking found in the shifting sands of postmodernist, emotionally driven, reactive expressions of feelings masqueraded as education. We can examine Dewey's words and really see if they line up with the progression of the education system as it has developed over time. Picking up with this quote from Dewey, education consists either in the ability to use one's powers in a social direction, or else in ability to share in the experiences of others and thus widen the individual consciousness to that of the race. Now, we can ask the question here, does education really consist of this conceptual understanding? Is there anything being left out in this summation? If so, why? My understanding is that education should be about gaining skills and knowledge with which we're able to reason about the world in which we live. The key word here being reason. What I see in this statement from Dewey is the abandonment of core structures of education which build up a child's reasoning capacities in favor of a black and white, single direction of thought, where all that we should be concerned with is the social dynamics of our thinking. What does this have to do with reasoning? Well, if a young person cannot differentiate between truth and falsehood as it's dictated by the structure of reality, what good does it serve them to be able to focus their efforts on, quote, widening their consciousness? I see this as nothing more than a call to establish an institution of indoctrination, whereby the education environment is transformed into a values-oriented social experiment aimed at homogenizing the worldview of a generation. We discussed this in our early video on values clarification, where children are taught to place a higher or lower social value on their fellow students based on predefined criteria. For Dewey to take this either-or stance on what education consists of, which is really only one choice when broken down to its core ideas, that being social programming, this betrays his goals of transforming the education environment from a place of actual learning into one of social experimentation and indoctrination. Next we have, the ultimate problem of all education is to coordinate the psychological and social factors. Once again, we need to ask, is this true? For Dewey to use a word like ultimate here is to cover a massive amount of ground regarding the purview of education and what its aims and purpose are. In many respects, this idea has a direct parallel with the ideas of Edward Bernays and his work within the fields of propaganda and public relations. The coordination of the psychological and the social is exactly what the propagandists set out to achieve whenever they're trying to sway the masses to think and behave in specific and directed ways. This effort is an attempt to inject the manipulative psychological schemes understood by Freud and others into the school environment. If you recall from the video where we introduced John Dewey and his thinking, he believed that the American way of life that was underpinned by Judeo-Christian values of individualism and personal responsibility must be done away with, and a new system of collectivist ideology based on materialism and naturalist worldviews should be the replacement. He also understood that the way to actually get this shift to be widely accepted was to change the worldviews and beliefs of the country's youth, thereby ensuring that the change would happen long-term when the younger generations had undergone the psychological and social programming that would achieve the collectivist goals. It was sort of a Trojan horse type of thing where you get the mechanism of attack inside the stronghold of the institutions, and then you can take over from within. Dewey saw the problem, and he knew how to enact the solution that he was aiming for. Lastly, the coordination demands that the child be capable of expressing himself, but in such a way as to realize social ends. We can see here that Dewey was interested in enacting this plan with extreme urgency. The term demands here shows us that he's not simply interested in discussing the nuances of how to reform education or what areas of, say, classical curriculums could be improved upon in future generations. Rather, he has desires for a type of society, and he understands the means by which his visions will be achieved. Now, this is something that I do not wish to understate about the way our world works today. There are people and organizations who are working with all diligence and extreme focus to achieve the kinds of full-spectrum dominance over the entire population that can only happen through control of our minds and our capacity to think well. If we're able to do this, we'll be able to spot their schemes, and it will make it very much more difficult for them to enact the plans that they have undertaken. Now, while Dewey was an individual inside of a massive matrix of history, ideology, monetary fluctuation, and cultural evolution, in this context, he is representative of the truth of what we're dealing with when it comes to the ways in which the large moves have been made to force the slow, methodical march towards global enslavement inside a system of dark and destructive power. The area of education is a topic that we must look at in depth, and the coming videos in the series that we're going to roll out here will be focused on understanding the issues present in today's education system and just what that means for us in society. There are serious implications, and I wish to help people come out of the programming that was run on generations of kids, myself included. We will be looking at various data trends, literacy rates, and many other indicators of the health of our country's education system, as well as just what kinds of programming were used to lead us to where we are today. I recommend that we all become familiar with some names, at least on the side of the programmers, and some of these would be John Dewey himself, B.F. Skinner, Edward Thorndike, Benjamin Bloom, and the illustrious Rockefellers. We will be looking at the interconnected ways in which these men have worked, or once worked, to shift what was once the most successful and prestigious education system in the world to that of a full-scale indoctrination of collectivist, postmodern, dogmatic ideology. So until next week, please stay diligent, check in on your loved ones, and stay vigilant, and keep your minds on guard.